rain poured heavily over the crowded city square, washing dirt into streams that flowed along the cracked pavement. Street vendors pulled tarps over their stalls, wealthy shoppers hurried with umbrellas, and in the middle of it all stood a thin black girl no older than 16, clutching a small cardboard sign that read in shaky handwriting, "Can I play for food?" Her clothes were torn, her shoes soaked through, and her ribs pressed against her skin from too many nights without a proper meal. She had no instrument, no shelter, only a desperate hope. A group of teenagers spotted her, sneering as they read her sign. "Play what? You can't even afford an umbrella, let alone a piano," one boy mocked. Their laughter stung, but the girl, whose name was Naomi, lifted her chin and whispered, "Just one chance." People brushed past, ignoring her plea, until finally she noticed through the cafe window across the street a glossy grand piano standing silently in the corner. Her heart thumped. If only someone would let her touch it, just once, she could show them who she truly was. Naomi had once lived a very different life. Before tragedy stole her parents and poverty dragged her into the streets, she had spent hours at the old upright piano her mother bought from a thrift shop. It was out of tune, its keys yellowed, but it had been her sanctuary. Her mother always said, "Your fingers speak louder than words, Naomi. When the world won't listen, let the piano tell your story." But when her mother passed away suddenly and her father disappeared, Naomi's piano was sold by the landlord to cover unpaid rent. Since then, she wandered, carrying only her memories and the rhythm of music that lived in her soul. She hadn't touched real keys in over a year, but her mind replayed compositions by Chopin, Beethoven, and Liszt, like secret prayers she whispered to herself at night. Inside the cafe, a wealthy couple sipped lattes while scrolling on their phones. Naomi hesitated before pushing the glass door open, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks. She shuffled toward the manager, her voice barely audible. "Please, sir, could I play your piano for just a few minutes? I don't want money. I only want a meal." The man frowned, glancing at her ragged clothes. Customers snickered. "This isn't a shelter," one woman scoffed. Another laughed. "What's next? Are you going to ask to play Carnegie Hall?" Naomi's cheeks burned, but her eyes didn't waver. "I just need to play," she whispered. The manager shook his head at first, muttering about disturbing paying guests, but one old man sitting near the counter leaned forward. "Let the girl try," he said. "What harm can it do?" His voice carried a strange authority, and reluctantly the manager waved his hand. "Fine. 5 minutes. Then out." Naomi's heart pounded as she approached the piano, her reflection trembling in its polished black surface. She slid onto the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys, frozen for a moment as doubt crept in. What if she had forgotten? What if her fingers stumbled? The laughter of the teenagers outside echoed in her ears. But then she closed her eyes and remembered her mother's words. Slowly, she pressed the first chord. The sound was rich, pure, like a voice she thought she had lost forever. She began with a simple melody, hesitant at first, but then her hands found their rhythm, weaving faster, fuller. Notes cascaded like raindrops, building into a storm of music that filled every corner of the cafe. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The mocking smirks melted into stunned silence as Naomi's small frame seemed to vanish, leaving only the raw brilliance of her music behind. She played Chopin's Ballad No. 1. Her fingers racing, bending the instrument to her will as if she had been born for this very moment. Each note carried her hunger, her loneliness, her longing, and yet, it also carried her defiance. The cafe trembled under the weight of her sound. Customers rose from their seats, drawn closer like moths to flame. Tears welled in some eyes. Others clutched their chests as if they had forgotten what beauty felt like. The wealthy couple who had laughed earlier stood speechless, realizing the girl they dismissed carried more talent in her fingertips than they had ever seen in their lives. Naomi poured every ounce of her being into the performance, forgetting the rain, the hunger, the cold. This was her truth, laid bare for all to hear. When the final note lingered in the air, the silence that followed was deafening. Then, like a wave crashing, applause erupted. People stood clapping, cheering, some even crying. Naomi blinked, dazed, as if waking from a dream. For a moment she thought she might be in trouble, but instead she saw awe on every face. The old man who had spoken for her earlier wiped a tear from his cheek and whispered, "Prodigy." The manager, who had nearly thrown her out, stumbled forward, his jaw slack. Where did you learn to play like that?" Naomi looked down at her trembling hands. "My mother taught me. She always said music was the only thing that would never leave me." Suddenly, the old man stepped forward, pulling out a business card. Whispers rippled through the crowd as some recognized him. He was Maestro Klein, a world-renowned conductor who had led orchestras in London, Paris, and New York. He studied Naomi with an intensity that made her shiver. "Child, do you understand what you have? This is no mere talent. It's genius. Raw, unshaped, but undeniable." Naomi's eyes widened, hope flickering for the first time in years. The teenagers outside, who had laughed at her, now pressed against the window, their mouths hanging, open as they realized what they had mocked. Maestro Klein knelt beside Naomi. "I will not let this gift be wasted. You deserve training, an audience, a future." He glanced at the manager. "Bring her food. Tonight, she eats." The cafe erupted in applause again as plates of warm food were rushed to Naomi, who could barely hold back tears as she took her first real meal in days. Between bites, Klein continued, "Tomorrow, you come with me. We will find you a home, lessons, everything you need. The world must hear you." Naomi shook her head, overwhelmed. "I'm just a homeless girl." But the maestro leaned closer. "No, you are a prodigy, and prodigies are not forgotten." Word spread quickly. Within hours, videos of Naomi's performance hit social media, gaining millions of views. Comments poured in from around the globe. "She plays with the soul of someone twice her age, and this girl needs a stage immediately." Offers of help flooded the cafe's inbox. Music schools, sponsors, even television networks wanted to know her story. The same city that had ignored her hours before now held its breath, waiting to see where she would go next. The teenagers who mocked her hid in shame. Their laughter turned to regret as the world praised the very girl they had dismissed. Naomi's life had shifted in an instant, from invisibility to the spotlight. Weeks later, Naomi stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, wearing a simple white dress donated by a local seamstress. The grand piano gleamed under the lights, waiting. Maestro Klein adjusted her hair gently, whispering, "Remember, you are not playing for them. You are playing for you and for the mother who believed in you." Naomi stepped onto the stage, and the audience rose in thunderous applause before she had even touched the keys. She bowed nervously, then sat down, closing her eyes. As her fingers danced across the ivory, she felt no hunger, no cold, no shame. She was no longer a homeless girl begging for food. She was Naomi, the piano prodigy whose music would never be silenced again. The night at Carnegie Hall was only the beginning. Naomi's performance was broadcast on television and streamed online, breaking records as millions tuned in to witness the miracle of a once homeless girl now commanding one of the greatest stages in the world. Critics raved, calling her the rebirth of classical music. Some said her raw, emotional style reminded them of the legends, Horowitz, Gould, Rubinstein, yet carried a fire entirely her own. Invitations flooded in. From Vienna, Berlin, and Tokyo, each orchestra desperate to host the prodigy whose music carried both heartbreak and hope. Naomi could hardly believe it. Just weeks ago she had begged strangers for food. Now entire cities begged her to play for them. But fame brought new challenges. Reporters swarmed her with cameras, digging into her past. Stories about her being homeless, about her mother's death, splashed across headlines. Naomi felt exposed, fragile, but Maestro Klein reminded her, "Your pain is your power. Do not let them shame you. Let them hear you." Meanwhile, the teenagers who had once mocked her couldn't escape their guilt. Classmates recognized them in the viral video where they laughed at Naomi's cardboard sign. They became targets of ridicule themselves. You laughed at a prodigy? People jeered. For the first time, the bullies felt the sting of humiliation Naomi had known all her life. Naomi, however, chose not to dwell on revenge. Instead, she focused on her music. Each performance became a message to those still unheard, the poor, the broken, the invisible. She used her earnings to fund music programs for children living on the streets, saying, "No child should ever have to beg for the chance to play." Audiences adored her not only for her brilliance, but for her humility. The once ignored homeless girl was now a beacon of hope. Still, at night, she sometimes lay awake, clutching the memory of her mother's worn hands teaching her notes on that old thrift shop piano. The fame was dazzling, but all Naomi really wanted was to make her mother proud. Months later, Naomi returned to the very cafe where it all began. The piano still stood by the window, polished now like a shrine. Crowds gathered, whispering excitedly, pointing at her as if she were royalty. The cafe manager, who once dismissed her, nervously approached with flowers. "Miss Naomi, we are honored," he stammered. Naomi smiled gently and asked if she could play again. As her fingers touched the keys, the crowd outside filled the street, silent in awe. For many, it was as though time had rewound, reminding them of the moment a starving girl first stunned them all with her gift. Across the street, the same teenagers lingered, too ashamed to enter. Naomi noticed them, her eyes softening. When she finished playing, she walked outside, holding her hands open. The crowd parted in silence. "I forgive you," she said simply. The teens lowered their heads, tears welling. We were wrong. We didn't know." Naomi smiled faintly. "No one knew. But now maybe you'll listen, not just to me, but to others who need kindness." The forgiveness cut deeper than punishment ever could, and the bullies knew they would never forget the lesson. Naomi's story spread even further after that moment of grace. Newspapers didn't just call her a prodigy anymore. They called her a teacher, a healer. Universities begged her to give lectures about resilience. Charities asked her to speak on behalf of the homeless, and everywhere she went, children followed her with wide eyes, hoping to touch the girl who had turned pain into symphony. She grew into her role gracefully, but never arrogantly. Each concert ended with her thanking her mother, whispering, "This is for you." One day, Naomi received an invitation unlike any other, an offer to perform for the United Nations at a global summit on poverty. She hesitated at first, overwhelmed, but Maestro Klein urged her. "The world must hear your story, not just your music." Standing before leaders of every nation, Naomi told them about nights of hunger, about laughter that cut like knives, about strangers who finally gave her a chance. Then she sat at the piano and played an original composition, weaving sorrow and hope together in a melody so haunting that hardened politicians wiped their eyes. The performance was broadcast worldwide, sparking donations and programs to support homeless youth. Naomi's music was no longer just art, it was change. As the years passed, Naomi grew into a woman who commanded respect in every hall she entered. Yet she never forgot her roots. She bought back a piano much like the one her mother had once owned, placing it in her home as a reminder. Fame and fortune never erased the scars of her past, but instead of hiding them, she wore them proudly. "Every scar is a note," she told her students. "Together, they make the symphony of who you are." Her students adored her, calling her not only a prodigy, but also a mentor who saw greatness in them when no one else did. The cafe where it all began eventually turned into a small museum dedicated to her first public performance. Tourists came from all over to see the spot where Naomi's journey had begun, snapping pictures beside the piano that had introduced her to the world. The old man, Maestro Klein, grew frail with age, but Naomi stayed by his side until his final days, calling him the second father she never had. At his funeral, she played a piece written just for him, her tears falling onto the keys as the audience wept with her. She had given the world so much, but she never stopped giving to those who gave to her. In the end, Naomi's legacy stretched far beyond stages and standing ovations. She became a symbol, a reminder that brilliance can rise from the darkest places, that kindness can change a destiny, and that one chance is sometimes all it takes to alter the course of a life. People no longer remembered her as the homeless girl, but as the prodigy who changed hearts across the globe. And every time she sat at the piano, she whispered softly before playing, "This is for you, Mama." And with that, Naomi's music continued to echo across generations, proving that true beauty isn't found in wealth or privilege. It's found in resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to play even when the world is laughing.